Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Pratt. I'm the peacemonger. It is Wednesday morning of the 28th of January, I believe. Time is flying. I can't believe this month has passed so quickly. I'm delighted to welcome on to the show today Alex Krainer. Alex is a market analyst, geopolitical analyst, and former hedge fund manager. He's also an accomplished author. We'll get onto that a bit during this show, but he's one of the rare commentators on geopolitics who actually can straddle the world of economics, finance, and politics, which I think many people actually can't. And I think that's one of the failings of modern policy development. So, Alex, very warm welcome from actually for a change of sunny England to the show.
Thank you very much, Ian. Very happy to join you. Greetings to your viewers and listeners from rainy, drizzly Monaco.
Well, who would have thought that we'd be talking about sunny England and rainy Monaco?
Indeed.
Look, Alex, I followed your analysis very closely, and one of the things you talk about a lot is the changing world order, and also the fact that actually political elites, especially in Europe and of course in Britain, have not yet caught on to the fact that this change is happening, or at the very least, sort of clinging on to the old unipolar model for dear life, even as the Americans start to hint that they might be shifting towards multipolarity too. What forms the basis of your assessment that this change is inevitable and irrevocable?
I'm not sure that it's inevitable or irrevocable, but I think it's advancing very much in earnest. And I think that maybe the first clear and unequivocal indication of this is what happened in Davos. Because Trump came to Davos with a delegation of about 300 people, and while he didn't talk explicitly about the changing world order, a lot of his delegates did, primarily Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, and the trade representatives, Ian, his name escapes me now. Maybe it's not Ian, but maybe I have to look at my notes. Greer, Jamieson Greer. Jamieson Greer. And so up until now, from the Trump administration, we had statements here and there from Trump and others that sounded more like populist um, campaign slogans, maybe. You weren't really sure that they meant it, that it was meant to, sound good to the crowd, but uh, so let's first specify exactly what we're talking about. If we go back to 2021, the meeting in Davos was held in May. George Soros held his annual uh, address, and he gave a speech in which he said, quote, "The world is increasingly engaged in a struggle between two systems of governance." That's his exact words. And so what is he talking about? He was saying it's between open societies and closed societies, which is kind of correct. Uh, the way other people would characterize it would be between democracies and autocracies. But if you peel the onion to its essence, it's actually between the British system of free trade and what came to be known as the American system, the Hamiltonian system of political economy. And if I could summarize the difference in a nutshell, it's basically uh, under the British free trade system, capital is free to flow everywhere in the world, basically in pursuit of highest return on investment. Trade is also unrestricted, meaning the low-cost producer of commodity product at scale wins. Whereas the American system of political economy, which was pioneered by Alexander Hamilton in the first half of the 19th century, basically closes the economy partially and creates a protected environment for domestic producers. So what you get is a development of domestic industry, uh, growth of small and medium-sized uh, enterprises. And basically, the effect, and this has been shown in many, many examples in history, is that by applying the American system, you get a practically spectacular advance in prosperity and standard of living. Whereas with the British free trade system, it's basically a system of race to the bottom. And Jamieson Greer, in his remarks at Davos, actually called it that. So his whole presentation, which went on for about half hour, he mentioned the the champions of the American system, like Alexander Hamilton, like Abraham Lincoln, like Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor Henry Carey, and a number of other people. He explicitly mentioned them by name. He presented the effects of applying the American system, and he did call explicitly the free trade system as the system of downward race to the bottom. So this is where the conflict is. Now, this is not just a harmless thing where, a country has the right to choose whatever system of governance they democratically choose. Uh, you know, uh, all eight of the American presidents who were either assassinated while in office or mysteriously died, all of them tried to implement the American system. That includes Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy and FDR and McKinley and, well, eight of them. I can't come up with all eight off the top of my head. And then we know that Trump had two assassination attempts at him, apparently. And then another effect is that the United States had a civil war in 1863 over this issue. Slavery was downstream of the systems of governance, but basically, under Harry Carey's guidance, the ideas to create the United States into an industrial powerhouse. So they did that, but the South remained a commodity producer for global markets, principally the British Empire, and very heavily dependent on slave labor. So basically, all the symptoms of one system versus the other were already very much discernible in the United States, North versus South. And that then led to the Civil War, which wasn't quite spontaneous. It was instigated by the British Empire because they perceived the United States as a as an up-and-coming rival and a threat to their hegemony. So that's how big this is. This is, not a small cosmetic policy adjustment. This is the end of the last 200 years of economic policy in the world. And now you asked whether it's inevitable. It's not inevitable because, it's being championed by Trump today. If for some reason something bad should happen to Trump, this could all collapse again because it's in its infancy. And when I mentioned that one of the possibilities as a reaction is a civil war, we already see in the United States that there are social tensions that are being characterized as the beginnings of a civil war. So this could very much be related. It probably is related because the segment of society that has benefited the most from the free trade system are now the most powerful system, most powerful groups in the United States and the world. And they certainly don't want to see their gravy train derailed. So they will fight to the death to preserve it. And so this is going to define probably a very tumultuous segment of history that's ahead of us. And I think only at the end will we know who won and who lost.
Yeah. And there's a slight contradiction there in the Trump approach because he holds all of the kind of big moguls of industry, the Jeff Bezos is, the Elon Musk, very close to him, while advancing this heresy of Hamiltonian political economy, as you describe it. And is it possible for him even to kind of balance those two completely separate, political and economic forces and have a credible way forward?
Well, I think he has no choice because he cannot just make all these very wealthy, very powerful people simply vanish and go from a clean slate. So he has to advance an agenda that's adverse to probably the most powerful ruling interest in the United States. And so I think he has to balance that because otherwise, if he turns everybody against himself from one day to the next, he's going to lose. So it seems to me that he's playing his game in a devious way, in the sense, obviously, he has to horse trade with a lot of people there. People wonder, oh, why is he so friendly with this horrible person, Lindsey Graham? He goes golfing with them and they're all friendly. Well, because Lindsey Graham practically controls the Senate and Trump doesn't. And then, you have the Israel question, which is part of the problem because Israel um, is the creation of the empire. And Israel is going to be used to oppose him. And not just Israel, I mean, Israeli supporters are going to be used to oppose him in his domestic policies. And so all of these things are extremely complicated. It really is a Gordian knot. And it seems to me that in trying to untangle this Gordian knot, Trump is actually relying on a very small circle of his supporters, people he trusts in his cabinet, or even people who are not in the cabinet, like Witkoff and Kushner. They're not really part of the government, but the most delicate affairs and negotiations, when they happen, he always sends the two of them. And then I think that he cooperates closely with the Russian government, and I believe that in one way or another, he's also coordinating with the Chinese government, because I believe that all of them are interested in a multipolar world, or, you know, multilateral, uh, and all of them are opposed to the globalist system of free trade. So, in a way, they're on the same side, except that the entrenched Cold War thinking that's still prevalent in the United States has created a culture where you just can't come out one day and say, like, oh, well, our European allies, they're actually our enemies. And, our enemies, Russia and China, they're actually our friends. So that's what I'm going to do, because the whole American public is going to think you've lost the plot, you're completely mad, and you need to be removed from power. So, you know, it's a very, very delicate, difficult balancing act. But I think that now, since Davos, it's very clear that this is what Trump is doing. And so, because he's doing it in this stealthy way by deception, we can't predict his next move. And so we
Yeah,
just have to sit back and watch the situation unfold.
yeah, yeah, I agree. And of course, I mean, I'm not sure myself uh, that the whole of the American population is against this. I think his MAGA idea, essentially kind of reinvesting in the forgotten millions who voted him into power, and who the Huffington Post wrote off in the run up to the 2016 presidential election. I think some of these messages actually resonate. with them more than the mainstream media in the US, CNN and so on, even Fox News actually, would would have you believe. But if his approach is built on sort of reinvesting in US manufacturing and therefore following of that actually exporting more goods overseas, surely the exorbitant privilege will always prevent that from happening because the dollar will always be too strong to to allow that dream to become reality.
Well, actually, I'm not sure about that because, every reserve currency in the world had its day, and then it it collapsed. And uh, the same is happening to the US dollar. And while I was in my hedge fund career, I can tell you that everybody in that community understood for a long time that the dollar had to collapse one day. It's, their exorbitant privilege was unsustainable, and it had to be reinforced with, 700, 800 military bases around the world, because, people won't voluntarily sell you their produce for pieces of paper, not even pieces of paper, balances in the Federal Reserve account somewhere that then you can use only in the way that the United States government agrees with. So, you can't take your US dollars balances at Federal Reserve and say, oh, I'm going to buy this XYZ product from North Korea. They'll say, no, no, you'll buy it from us or one of our allies. So that had to be enforced. And usually the cost of enforcement of this system is higher than the benefit that the nation gets. And so for a while that can carry on, but over the long term it it erodes slowly until it becomes very clear that it's going to collapse at some point. And so I think that one of the challenges for the Trump administration is to engineer a a collapse of the US dollar that's going to end up being least disruptive as possible to the United States. And the gained benefit from that is that they get to pay their debts, which are absolutely staggering in a worthless currency. And one thing that we've seen, whether it's by design or just happens to be this way, is that since Trump came to power, the US dollar has depreciated by nearly 20% against the euro and the pound. And so that's interesting. And also the proportion of US dollar as a reserve currency in the world has also um, taken a sharp drop. I think I hesitate to say the number, but I think it's fallen below 40%. It used to be practically two-thirds uh, 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. Uh, However well he manages though that transition, it's surely going to be massively disruptive to the US federal system and the US budget, which depends on inflows of foreign capital to just keep the lights on in federal buildings. I mean, is there is a manageable disruptive scenario here that doesn't just collapse the organs of the US state?
Well, there are a number of them. Trump has already implemented a number of measures to attract industries back to the United States and to spur innovation and small and medium-sized enterprise. One of the important measures they've introduced is that if you come to the United States and you invest in a manufacturing facility, you can now expense the whole investment in the first year. So that's a very significant tax deduction there, rather than amortizing it over 38, 40, 41 years. But the effects of all these measures are going to be felt with a certain delay. You know, if I go to the United States and build some manufacture of something, that's going to be a big investment. So it's going to show in the balance of trade, maybe, but it's not going to show in the GDP because it'll take a while for the whole facility to ramp up to the full, to go to the market, to find the market, and for me to start selling goods to show revenue. But generally, these types of turnaround in history have happened, and they've, if you apply this American system of political economy properly, the results tend to be quite spectacular. And so, if Trump can weather the political storms at home, I think that he will be successful. Now, the transition period, or as Mark Carney called it, the rupture. Um, I think it's quite possible that the United States will be helped by the likes of Russia and China because I think that they have a stake in him being successful because they are also opposed to this system of globalist free trade and one, let's call it one world rule-based order uh, because it's obviously adversarial to them. Now, if this rule-based global order has the United States on its side, then it's still a very powerful force. But if the United States is in the other camp, in the camp of multilateral integrations, then that camp is much more powerful. So in that sense, I think that neither the Chinese nor the Russians uh, have any interest in seeing Trump fail. And I think that Russia and China are very powerful, but there are other forces in the world that I think are changing their mindset gradually, and that includes, of course, Japan and India and many other countries that have a difficult relation with the United States. But I think that in discussions, in coordinations with Russia, with China, um, with India and Japan, I think that little by little, I think a united front could emerge. To give you an example, it's obvious that the relationship between the United States and Iran is terrible nowadays. But if the nature of this conflict is understood properly, the Iranians themselves uh, should want to see Trump prevail. I know how strange this sounds, but I've been I've been maintaining since 2016, since Trump came into the White House the first time, that if I were an ardent Zionist, I wouldn't trust Trump as far as I could throw him. And I don't believe that he's sincere in his support for Israel, and I don't believe that he's sincere in his hostility to Iran. And it, 3 out of 3 times when his administration came under concerted pressure to launch an attack on Iran, all 3 times he weaseled out of it. The first one was in 2019, remember after the Iranians downed an American drone in the Persian Gulf. The second time was the summer of 2025, and the last time was this month. And all 3 times, Trump failed to pull the trigger. Well, some people will say like, yeah, yeah, he attacked Iran in June of 25. And I tell them, well, that was a fake war, obviously. It was a 25-minute attack with a total of about 40 missiles and bombs. That's not a war. Compare that to Somalia, to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Libya, to Syria, and so forth. Those are real wars. This was obviously a fake war. It was like the World Wrestling Federation uh, conflict, and the Iranians responded in kind. So, you know, if you read these situations between the lines, it seems to me that these powers have an interest in succeeding together, even though on the facade of things, it looks like they're enemies in adversarial situations. And so maybe Trump administration cannot discuss these things with the Iranians directly, but they can discuss them indirectly through, the mediation of the Russians or the Chinese.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful actually, and I agree with your assessment. I mean, right since 2017, Trump has always been trying to battle his way through the kind of blob in Washington, and I think that's less of a challenge now than it was, but it's still a huge challenge, particularly on this issue, particularly as it relates to Iran, but also, of course, to Russia and China, given the strength of feeling on the Hill, and so on. So, I mean, I think that's quite a clever way, to frame it. But I mean, the national security strategy that has just recently been published still, suggests the old world US doctrine in terms of wanting to prevent Chinese domination of the South China Sea, and then code for preventing Chinese reunification with Taiwan, and still ups the rhetoric on Iran, and other places. So do you just think that is practical politics, that Trump is kind of throwing red meat to the wolves in Washington with the NSS, but actually is constantly trying to maneuver behind the scenes, along the lines that you've just outlined?
Yeah, I do believe so. And we have to understand that even his administration is still staffed by a lot of neocons and cold warriors. And so you can't write a national security strategy to say like, okay, now we're going to be allied with Russia and China, and we're going to turn our backs on Britain and France and European powers. So I read the national security strategy more than once, and I find that there's a little bit for everyone in there. You can read it in a number of different ways. But to give you a concrete example, if you want to introduce a measure or pursue some policy, uh, it's much easier to sell it if you say, well, this is against Russia and China. Concrete example, Greenland. So I believe that in Alaska, and there are some indications, this is just not just randomly Alex Krainer believes. Uh, Russia, China, and the United States discussed strategic cooperation in the Arctic. And from the statements of certain Russian officials, the United States is very much welcome with open arms to join these strategic development efforts. But, apart from Alaska, the United States doesn't really have a presence there. Now, I don't know exactly what, apart from trade routes and certain, resource development, this entails, but um, it might entail energy projects and communications projects. And so the Russians and the Chinese want the United States in there as a partner and not as a potential uh, enemy down the road. So whatever they intend to develop there, it will be much more secure and have a long-term success if the United States was part of that equation. So I think that for that reason and some other reasons, Trump is now very keen on getting control of Greenland. But rather than going to the public and to say, well, we've discussed strategic developments in the Arctic with the Chinese and the Russians, so we need Greenland. He says, we need Greenland because if we don't take it, the Russians and the Chinese are going to take it. So you see, and then, all these cold warriors in his administration are going to say, yeah, yeah, that's right. We need to counter the threat from Russia and China, so we need that. So, he gets political support. I think that's effective. Is it wise? I don't know, because over the long term, when you uh, when you engage in deception, you weave a tangled web, which, at some point it might prove counterproductive. I don't know. But this is how I see Trump act again and again and again. He does something, but explains it in a different way. Another example, he attacked certain academic institutions in the United States, and these academic institutions, like Columbia University. Columbia University was practically the ground zero of U.S. aid, and you know,
Mm.
that's where John Bolton goes when he's not in the office. That's where Hillary Clinton goes, and Victoria Nuland, and all of these. And so he hit them hard, but he didn't say, well, these are my political opponents, so that's why I'm going to defund them and make their life miserable. He said, "Oh, these people are, this university is uh, supportive of Hamas and they oppose Israel, so that's why." And then, of course, the big Israel supporting bloc in the United States approves, and the you know the policy doesn't ruffle too many feathers. So he keeps doing this. And so I think that he will keep doing it, which is why it's really important to not listen to what Trump says, but to watch the outcome of his policies in the end.
Yeah, that's right. 100% agree with that. And in that regard, he's he has similarities with Putin. I mean, Xi Jinping, it tends to be very measured in anything that he says. But Putin is also of the kind of characteristic that he likes to say things that are inflammatory and that he knows will be inflammatory. When actually, if you delve underneath, the substance, of his policy, it's clear. It's always been clear to me that he does actually want partnership with the West, in particular with the US. Although he does want economic partnership with Europe for sure, although he doesn't need it, and he's not going to do it at the expense of bending over NATO expansion into Ukraine. And so on. And the number of times whenever you listen to, I speak Russian, making speeches, he always refers to Western leaders as partners every time, pretty much every time he makes a speech. And of course, in the West, that they don't refer to Putin in nearly the same terms. So I believe that I wouldn't say they're kindred spirits. That would be going too far, but I think they understand each other's politics. And of course, the Europeans don't. And the Europeans are increasingly, it seems to me, being left behind this much bigger kind of shift in the geopolitical tectonic plates of international relations. I mean, how do you assess kind of the Europeans, in their final the doubt of globalism in Brussels?
Well, I think the Europeans, to use a colloquial expression, they've painted themselves into a corner because they have relied so heavily on their alliance with the United States that they find themselves with no plan B. It's as though nobody questioned, well, what happens if this alliance um, disintegrates at some point in the future? So rather than, diversifying their interests and being in good relations with China, with Europe, with the United States, with their neighbors, they have just simply thrown caution to the wind and bet the ranch on one card to play. And now it turns out that card is no good. And and not only that, but over time, they have staffed the key positions of power in the European Union and even in the key governments of European member states like Germany, France, UK, the Baltic states, Finland, and so forth, with very, very low caliber officials. Why? Because somebody who is learned and experienced and understands how things stand in the world might say, well, wait a minute, this policy doesn't make sense. We should be doing this. Well, that person is out straight away. You know, uh, if you if you're pursuing net zero policies, and if you're covering your top agricultural fields in solar panels at a cost of billions upon billions of dollars or pounds or euros, and then at the same time you're also supporting policy of dimming the sun, somebody might say, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't make sense. Well, as it turns out, that person would be overqualified for their position. Doesn't work out. We need to bring somebody who will not see any contradiction in such policies. And so as a result, you get people like Keir Starmer, like Kaya Kallas, like Emmanuel Macron, and so forth. People who are clearly very, very intellectually challenged. And in normal course of business, you wouldn't hire them for anything other than maybe, you know, making photocopies and making coffee. But as it happens, they are now in very high positions of power and define policy. And so, in Europe, we have a high commissioner for foreign affairs who cannot get a meeting with anybody in China or in Russia or in the United States. What purpose does she serve there other than every day reminding people about how much she hates Russia? That's all. That's all she does. But she's there and she's obstructing any constructive, any productive change in the way Europe relates to her neighbors, to China, to Russia. And so I think until this changes, uh, Europe is just slowly sinking into a sort of quicksand.
Yes, and that system of mediocrity that you've outlined, because it's also backed with large amounts of money. It attracts allies of the most dreadful character who are allies because they say what the globalists want to hear and receive money, in return for that. Zelensky is a classic example of that. Of course, in the UK, we have many examples, many of them Russian: Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Boris Berezovsky, and of course Bill Browder, who because he hates Putin and he talks about how bad Russia is now a knight of the realm. Amazingly, something that I'm unable to get past still today. Maybe you can, help illuminate, how this can even happen. Khodorkovsky is a saint, and Bill Browder is a knight.
Well, Khodorkovsky was the trustee for Jacob Rothschild interests in Russia. So that's why he is welcome, and that is why he has served a very useful purpose for the Western London-based financial interest. Same thing with Bill Browder. Bill Browder's partner in crime is HSBC Bank, which overtook the interest of Edmond Safra and his Republic National Bank of New York, which was Bill Browder's original seed investor in his uh, hedge fund in Russia. So Bill Browder used to run the largest foreign-owned hedge fund in Russia during the 1990s. And during that time, he has made a tremendous amount of money for himself and his investors. But a lot of practices that he engaged with were illegal. So he's actually a convicted criminal who is in London because he's protected there. And on the private level, I know people who know him personally, and it's rare to find somebody who is more greedy and money driven than Bill Browder. And so Bill Browder used to love uh, Vladimir Putin until about November 2005 when he was kicked out of Russia. That is, his visa was canceled And so he was not able to return there, and then his business fell apart, and then he started hating Putin. And so, because he was there, because he has a certain credibility, he has become the go-to expert on Russia and on Russian politics for a lot of these Western media organizations who like what Bill Browder has to say. The problem is that a lot of what Bill Browder has to say are outright lies. And he published a book called Red Notice. Red Notice was almost certainly ghostwritten by Lee Child. And I I read the Red Notice, and I understood that it was practically a pack of lies from cover to cover. It was packaged in very effectively, very skillfully, but nevertheless, uh, it's practically all false. And so this false narrative has actually taken the world closer to World War III, which is why I wrote my book called Grand Deception, to try to unmask this, because I perceived back in 2015 when this book was published that Bill Browder and the very powerful financiers who back him are pushing us into a war against Russia, collective West against Russia, which, a nuclear superpower, it could go very badly. But my book was banned after 6 weeks on the market, and it was banned at the intervention of one Jonathan Weiner, who used to be the policy advisor to John Kerry at the U.S. State Department. And then the book was republished under a different title by a publishing company named called Red Pill Press. And then another 5 weeks later, it was banned again. So, the book was written, but you're not supposed to read it. So they made sure that it's unavailable while Bill Browder is being promoted. And, every time he takes the microphone, it's easy to find, and it's in the feeds, it's in the algorithms and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I read his book while I was in Moscow at the British Embassy. And yeah, I had my doubts. I mean, he never even met Sergei Magnitsky, as far as I understand it, from sources, actually not Russian sources, British sources. And he wasn't entirely well regarded by one of the ambassadors that I was working with, British ambassadors in Moscow at the time. But I won't get into the detail of that. That has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, Alex. Thank you so much. I always enjoy talking to somebody who brings genuine, considered insight that's rooted in research, but also is very, very strategic. I always find these conversations very thought-provoking. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. I mean, essentially, to summarize, Trump is trying to kind of manage an orderly collapse of the dollar and avoid being assassinated in the process.
Yes, I
Is
believe
is
so. Yeah.
is what I take away from this. So thank you again, Alex, and thank you everybody who's listened and watched my shows and supported me. It's only 3 weeks in since I started. I've been amazed at how quickly this community is growing. Focused on the need for peace. Please do like and subscribe to continue to support my work. And wherever you are in the world, I wish you all very much peace. And once again, Alex, a huge thanks from sunny England.
Thank you, Ian. It's been an honor. Warm greetings to all your viewers and listeners. Much success with your podcast, and until the next time.
Many thanks.